My name is Mary, a name that once symbolized a fresh start, a new chapter in a life filled with promise. I was 30 years old, brimming with hopes and dreams. Little did I know, my life was about to take a turn I never expected. It all began 6 months into my marriage. My husband, Tom, and I were living in a cozy apartment, strategically located between our workplaces. I worked in the planning department of a major restaurant chain, a job that I loved, and where I could channel my passion for cooking into developing new products. Tom, with his upbeat personality and contagious laughter, worked for a company his father owned. One evening, as we sat down for a simple dinner, Tom's smile made the modest meal seem like a feast. "You know, Mary," he said, gently taking my hand, "you don't have to be perfect at housework. I'm just happy being with you." I smiled back, feeling a rush of affection. "I'm happy too, Tom, just to have dinner with the person I love." Our conversation flowed effortlessly, filled with plans and dreams for our future together. We laughed and teased each other, the kind of lighthearted banter that marked the early days of our love. But our bliss was short-lived. That night, as we lay in bed, Tom's phone rang. The sharp ringtone sliced through the silence, a harbinger of the storm that was about to hit our lives. "Hello." Tom's voice was groggy, his eyes squinting at the bright screen. I watched his expression change from sleepy annoyance to deep concern. "What? An accident? How's Dad?" My heart sank. An accident? His father? Tom hung up the phone, his face ashen. "It's Dad. He's had a serious accident. He's bedridden now." I reached out, touching his arm. "Tom, I'm so sorry. What can we do?" He looked at me, his eyes reflecting a turmoil of emotions. "We need to take care of him, Mary. He's going to need us now, more than ever." The weight of his words hung in the air, a weight I hadn't expected to bear so soon in our marriage. I nodded, trying to mask my anxiety. "Of course, we'll take care of him. Together." But as the days passed and the reality of our situation sank in, I realized that this was no ordinary challenge. It was a test of our love, our patience, and our strength as a couple. And so, our new journey began, not with the joyous adventures we had envisioned, but with a path strewn with obstacles and unexpected responsibilities. A journey that would test the very foundations of our marriage. Life has a way of throwing the unexpected at you, and that's precisely what happened to me and Tom. Our routine, once filled with shared laughter and dreams, was now overshadowed by the daunting responsibility of caring for his father. I remember walking into our father-in-law's room for the first time since the accident. He lay there, a shadow of the vibrant man I remembered. His eyes, once sparkling with wit and humor, were now dimmed with pain and vulnerability. "Mary, hi. I'm sorry to be a burden," he whispered, his voice barely above a hush. I shook my head, forcing a smile. "Don't be silly, Dad. We're family. We'll get through this together." But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of caregiving began to take its toll on me. I was constantly exhausted, my days and nights blurring into an endless cycle of medication, meals, and laundry. One evening, Tom came home to find me asleep on the couch, the TV still blaring. He gently nudged me awake. "Mary, you're working yourself too hard," he said, concern etched on his face. I rubbed my eyes, feeling a pang of guilt. "I'm fine, Tom. Just a bit tired, that's all." But Tom wasn't convinced. "You need help, Mary. This is too much for one person." I wanted to protest, to say that I could handle it, but deep down, I knew he was right. The breaking point came when Tom announced that he and his mother were going on a vacation to Hawaii. My mind reeled in disbelief as he broke the news. "We need a break, Mary. Just a week in Hawaii to recharge. You understand, right?" Tom said, avoiding my gaze. I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. "You're leaving? Now? But what about your father?" Tom looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Well, you're doing a great job with Dad. We thought. You thought I could handle it all by myself." I interrupted, my voice rising with frustration. "It's just for a week, Mary. We need this," Tom replied, his tone defensive. I felt a sense of abandonment and betrayal that I had never experienced before. Here I was, struggling to care for his father, and he was talking about a vacation. As they left for Hawaii, leaving me behind with a mountain of responsibilities, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger, sadness, and loneliness. It was a bolt from the blue, a stark reminder that life doesn't always go as planned. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I realized that this was just the beginning of a journey filled with challenges I never anticipated. A journey that would test my limits and force me to confront the realities of marriage, family, and the sacrifices they sometimes require. The days following Tom and his mother's departure for Hawaii felt like an endless marathon. Each morning began before dawn, with me scrambling to prepare breakfast, administer medication, and assist my father-in-law with his morning routine. One morning, as I gently helped him out of bed, he looked at me with a mix of gratitude and guilt. "Mary, you shouldn't have to do all this," he murmured, his voice heavy with remorse. I forced a cheerful smile, hiding my exhaustion. "It's okay, Dad. We're family, remember? Families take care of each other." But as the day progressed, my energy waned. I rushed to work, trying to keep up with my responsibilities, only to return home to more caregiving tasks. The lack of rest and the constant pressure started to wear me down. One evening, while preparing dinner after a particularly grueling day, I accidentally burnt the meal. Standing in the kitchen amidst the smoke and the smell of charred food, I felt a sense of defeat. Just then, Tom called. "Hey, Mary, how's everything back home?" His voice was carefree, a stark contrast to my frazzled state. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Everything's fine. Just a bit tired, that's all." "You're doing great, Mary. We'll be back soon," Tom said, but his words felt hollow. I wanted to cry, to tell him how hard it was, how alone I felt, but I held back. "Just enjoy your vacation, Tom. I'll manage here." As the days passed, the routine became more grueling. I was constantly running on empty, my mind and body screaming for rest. My father-in-law's health required constant attention, and I found myself becoming increasingly irritable and withdrawn. One day, as I was helping him with his rehabilitation exercises, he noticed my strained expression. "Mary, you look exhausted. Are you sure you're okay?" I paused, fighting back tears. "I'm fine, Dad. Just a bit tired, that's all." He reached out, his hand trembling slightly. "You're doing so much, Mary. Too much, perhaps. I wish I could help you." His words, filled with empathy and concern, were a balm to my weary soul, but they also served as a painful reminder of the immense responsibility I had taken on. That night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep despite my exhaustion, I realized that this situation was unsustainable. I was stretched too thin, physically and emotionally drained. The burden of care was too heavy for one person to bear, and I felt trapped in a cycle of endless caregiving, with no respite in sight. It was a sobering realization, one that forced me to confront the harsh truth of my circumstances. I was not just a wife and a daughter-in-law. I had become a full-time caregiver, a role I was neither prepared for nor capable of managing alone. The burden of care was slowly consuming me, and I knew something had to change. The day Tom and his mother were due to return from Hawaii, my sense of abandonment reached its peak. I had spent the week in a blur of caregiving and work, each day more exhausting than the last. As I was tidying up the house, preparing for their return, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, expecting to see Tom and his mother, but instead, it was a delivery man with a postcard from Hawaii. The bright, cheerful image of palm trees and beaches seemed to mock my weary state. I read the message on the back, Tom's handwriting breezy and carefree. "Hey, Mary, Hawaii is amazing. Wish you were here. See you soon." Tears welled up in my eyes. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion. It was the feeling of being left behind, neglected, while they enjoyed themselves. Later that day, Tom and his mother returned, tanned and rejuvenated. I watched as they entered the house, their laughter and chatter filling the room. It was as if they had stepped into a different world, one where responsibility and care did not exist. "Mary, we're back. Hawaii was incredible," Tom exclaimed, his eyes sparkling with excitement. I forced a smile, my heart heavy. "Welcome back. I'm glad you had a good time." Tom seemed oblivious to my fatigue. You should see the photos, the beaches, the sunsets. It was like paradise. His mother chimed in, her voice equally enthusiastic. Oh, Mary, you should have seen the luas and the hula dancers. Next time, you must come with us. Next time, I echoed hollowly, feeling a deep sense of disconnect. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, the disparity in our experiences was palpable. They shared stories and laughed, while I ate in silence, my mind and body still trapped in the relentless cycle of caregiving. After dinner, Tom approached me, his expression finally turning serious. Mary, you look tired. Everything okay with Dad while we were gone? I looked at him, a mix of anger and sadness in my eyes. It was challenging, Tom. Very challenging. He seemed taken aback. I didn't realize. I thought. You thought what, Tom? That I could handle everything on my own. My voice trembled with suppressed emotion. Tom's face fell. I'm sorry, Mary. I didn't mean to. But his apology felt empty. The realization that I had been left to face the challenges alone, while they escaped to a carefree paradise, was too much to bear. That night, as I lay in bed, the silence of the house around me, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loneliness and abandonment. The man I had married, the family I had joined, had left me to shoulder an immense burden alone. It was a stark reminder that sometimes, in marriage, the vows of support and partnership are forgotten, leaving one to face life's battles solo. This experience was a turning point, a moment of clarity that made me question the very foundations of my marriage. I realized that the path ahead would be filled with tough decisions, and that I needed to find the strength to confront the challenges, not just for my sake, but for my father-in-law's as well. The feeling of abandonment was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was also a wake-up call to reassess my life and my role within this family. The days following Tom and his mother's return from Hawaii were marked by a palpable tension. I tried to resume my routine, but the sense of abandonment lingered, casting a shadow over my efforts. One morning, as I was preparing breakfast, my mother-in-law walked into the kitchen. Her sharp gaze seemed to scrutinize every move I made. Mary, you look worn out. You should take better care of yourself, she remarked, her tone laced with a hint of criticism. I nodded, trying to keep my voice neutral. Thank you, I'm managing. She leaned against the counter, her eyes still fixed on me. You know, taking care of the house and my husband is a woman's duty. I did it all by myself when Tom was young. Her words stung, and I felt a surge of frustration. I'm doing my best, I replied, a bit more sharply than intended. Tom walked in at that moment, sensing the tension. Is everything okay here? His mother smiled sweetly at him, the picture of innocence, just giving Mary some friendly advice. Tom looked at me, a question in his eyes. I forced a smile, not wanting to start a conflict. Everything's fine. As the day progressed, my sense of isolation grew. Tom seemed increasingly distant, absorbed in his work, and often siding with his mother in small household matters. It felt as if I were slowly being pushed to the margins of this family, my role reduced to that of a caregiver and housekeeper. In the evenings, the three of us would sit in the living room, but the conversations were strained. My father-in-law, sensing the undercurrents of tension, would often retreat into silence, his eyes sad. One evening, as we were watching TV, my mother-in-law suddenly turned to me. Mary, I noticed you haven't been keeping up with the cleaning. The house is starting to look untidy. I looked around surprised. The house was as clean as I could manage, given my packed schedule. I'm sorry. I'll try to do better, I said, though I felt a growing resentment. Tom chimed in, his tone unexpectedly sharp. Yeah, Mary, Mom's right. We need to keep the house in better shape. I felt a twinge of betrayal. Tom's words, aligning with his mother's criticism, hurt more than I cared to admit. It was as if my efforts were invisible to them, as if the endless days of caregiving and household chores were of no consequence. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the day replayed in my mind. The criticism, the lack of appreciation, the feeling of being an outsider in my own home, it was all becoming too much. The struggle within me was growing, a battle between my sense of duty and the growing realization that I was losing myself in this role. The loneliness was palpable, a constant companion in the midst of a house full of people. I began to question my place in this family, my relationship with Tom, and the sacrifices I was making. It was a period of deep introspection, a time when I had to confront the harsh reality of my situation and make some difficult decisions about my future. The following weeks were a blur of tension and exhaustion. Every day, I felt more like a ghost in my own home, my presence barely acknowledged unless it was to point out a flaw or a missed chore. One particularly difficult evening, I was late coming home from work. The stress at the office had been mounting, and I was running on fumes. As I walked in, I saw Tom and his mother sitting at the dining table, their plates empty. "Mary, where have you been?" "Dinner is cold," Tom said, his tone laced with annoyance. "I'm sorry I got held up at work," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the weariness overwhelming me. His mother tutted disapprovingly. "A wife should prioritize her home. Work is important, but so is your family." I felt a pang of frustration. I'm trying to balance both. It's not easy. Tom's response was curt. "You need to manage your time better." That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of their words crushed me. I felt a growing sense of despair. The man I had married, who once looked at me with love and admiration, now saw me as a mere caretaker, someone who failed to live up to his and his mother's expectations. The next day, my father-in-law noticed my downtrodden demeanor. "Mary, you seem upset. Is everything okay?" he asked with genuine concern. I paused, considering whether to open up. "It's just, I feel overwhelmed. I'm trying my best, but it never seems to be enough." He looked at me with sympathetic eyes. "I understand. This situation is hard on you. Maybe you and Tom should talk. Clear the air." Encouraged by his words, I decided to have a conversation with Tom. That evening, I approached him, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. "Tom, can we talk? I feel like we're drifting apart," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, surprised. "Drifting apart? What do you mean?" I took a deep breath. "I'm struggling, Tom. With work, with caring for your father, with keeping the house together. I need your support." Tom's expression hardened. "Support? I'm working too, Mary. We're both under pressure. You just need to manage things better." His words felt like a slap in the face. Manage better. "Tom, I'm at my breaking point." He stood up, his frustration evident. "Well, I don't know what you want me to do. This is just how things are." The conversation went in circles, with no understanding or empathy coming from Tom. I realized then that my husband, the man I had once shared my dreams with, was no longer the partner I thought I had. He had changed, or perhaps he had always been this way, and I just hadn't seen it. That night, I cried myself to sleep, mourning the loss of the relationship we once had. It was clear to me that something had to change. I couldn't continue living this way, feeling alone and unsupported in my own home. The breaking point had been reached, and now I had to find the courage to make a decision about my future. In the weeks that followed, a growing sense of disillusionment took root in me. My life had become a cycle of work, caregiving, and unending criticism. Tom's indifference to my struggles only deepened my sense of isolation. Then, one fateful evening, everything changed. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when I overheard a conversation between Tom and his mother in the living room. Their voices were hushed, but the words were clear enough to send a shockwave through me. "We should have thought about this before we went to Hawaii," Tom was saying, a note of worry in his voice. "If anyone finds out how we funded the trip," his mother's response was cold and calculated. "No one will find out. The company finances are complex enough to hide a few expenses. Besides, it's not like your father will be checking the accounts anytime soon." I froze, the knife I was holding hovering in midair. They had used company funds for their personal vacation. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. That night, I confronted Tom. "I overheard your conversation with your mother. Did you really use company money for your trip to Hawaii?" Tom's face went pale. "Mary, it's not what you think. It was just a small amount, and I plan to pay it back." "A small amount?" Tom, that's embezzlement." I couldn't keep the shock and anger out of my voice. He ran a hand through his hair, looking more defeated than I'd ever seen him. "I know. I messed up. But please, Mary, you can't tell anyone. It would ruin me." The man standing before me was a stranger, someone willing to compromise his integrity, our financial security, for a holiday. The revelation was too much for me to bear. I went to bed that night with a heavy heart, my mind racing. The trust and respect I had for Tom were shattered. The moral compass that I thought guided us both had been ignored, and I felt utterly alone in my decision-making. The next day, I visited my father-in-law in his room. He noticed my distress immediately. "Mary, what's wrong? You seem troubled," he said with concern. I hesitated, torn between my loyalty to Tom and my need for guidance. "It's Tom. He's made some bad decisions, financial ones, and I don't know what to do." My father-in-law's expression turned grave. "Mary, integrity is everything in life. If Tom has made mistakes, he needs to face them. And you need to think about what's best for you." His words resonated with me. I realized that the path ahead would be difficult, but necessary. I needed to confront Tom and his actions, and more importantly, I needed to reassess my place in this marriage and this family. The revelation of Tom's actions was a turning point for me. It forced me to acknowledge the uncomfortable truth about our relationship and the values we held. It was a moment of clarity, albeit a painful one, that set the stage for the tough decisions I would soon have to make. In the wake of the revelation about Tom's misuse of company funds, I found myself at a crossroads. The trust I had placed in my husband was broken, and the fabric of our marriage seemed irreparably torn. Amid this turmoil, a glimmer of hope emerged in an unexpected form: my father-in-law. One afternoon, while Tom was out, my father-in-law called me to his room. His voice was weak, but his eyes held a certain determination. "Mary, I've been thinking," he began, "about you, about Tom, about all of this mess." I sat down beside him, my heart heavy. "Yes, Dad?" He took a deep breath. "I can't undo what Tom has done, but I want to help. You've been a pillar of strength in this house, and it's time someone stood up for you." I was taken aback by his words. "But Dad, what can you do? You're still recovering." He smiled, a hint of his old fire shining through. "I may be bedridden, but I'm not powerless. I've built that company from the ground up. I have contacts, resources. I can make things right, at least with the company." His words were like a balm to my bruised spirit. For the first time in months, I felt a ray of hope piercing through the darkness. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And Mary," he added, "whatever you decide about your future, know that I support you. You deserve happiness, not this life of endless toil and thanklessness." His endorsement gave me the courage I needed to confront the situation head-on. That evening, when Tom returned, I was ready to have a candid conversation. "Tom, we need to talk," I said as soon as he walked through the door. He looked at me, sensing the seriousness in my tone. "What's up?" "It's about us, about our marriage," I started, my heart pounding. "I can't live like this anymore, feeling alone, unsupported. And after what happened with the company, I just don't know if I can trust you." Tom's face fell. "Mary, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." "But you did, Tom, you did. And now I need some time to think, to figure out what I want for my future." Tom nodded, the weight of my words sinking in. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." As I went to bed that night, I felt a sense of resolve growing within me. The conversation with Tom was just the beginning of a long journey towards healing and self-discovery. For the first time in a long while, I felt in control of my life, ready to make decisions for my own well-being. The path ahead was uncertain, but with my father-in-law's support and my newfound strength, I was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The days following my conversation with Tom were filled with introspection. I spent long hours pondering my future, weighing my options. It was a period of deep soul-searching, and I often found myself lost in thought, seeking clarity amidst the chaos of my life. During this time, my father-in-law's support was unwavering. One afternoon, as we sat in his room, he said something that would stay with me. "Mary, remember you have the right to choose your own path. Don't let anyone else dictate your happiness." His words echoed in my mind as I made the hardest decision of my life. I chose to leave. I needed to rediscover who I was outside the confines of this marriage and this home that had become my prison. The day I decided to tell Tom, my heart was heavy, but my resolve was firm. "Tom, I've made a decision," I began, my voice steady. He looked up, a sense of dread in his eyes. "What decision?" "I'm leaving," I said simply. "I need to find myself again, to live a life where I feel valued and respected." Tom was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice laced with sorrow. "I understand. I'm sorry it came to this. I hope you find what you're looking for." As I packed my bags, a mix of emotions swirled within me: sadness, relief, fear, and hope. I was stepping into the unknown, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of empowerment. On my last day, my father-in-law called me to his room. "Mary, you're doing the right thing," he said, his eyes filled with sadness yet respect. "You're a strong woman, and you deserve happiness." "Thank you, Dad. You've been more of a father to me than I could ever ask for," I replied, tears brimming in my eyes. As I walked out the door of the house, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I was free from the constraints of a loveless marriage, free from the criticisms and the unending demands. I was embarking on a new journey, one where I was the author of my own story. That night, as I settled into a small apartment I had rented, I felt a sense of peace. It was modest, but it was mine. A place where I could start anew, rebuild my life on my terms. I realized that embracing freedom wasn't just about leaving a difficult situation. It was about reclaiming my identity, my dreams, and my aspirations. It was a journey of self-discovery, of finding strength in my vulnerability and courage in my choices. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a sense of excitement for the future. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to explore. I had embraced my freedom, and with it, a world of possibilities had opened up. The next chapter of my life was just beginning, and I was ready to write it with hope, resilience, and a newfound sense of self. In the weeks and months that followed my departure, life took on a new rhythm. I found solace in my solitude and started to rediscover the joys of independence. My days were no longer dictated by the needs and whims of others. They were my own to shape and fill as I pleased. I focused on my career, diving into my work with a renewed passion. The freedom to explore my ideas and creativity brought a sense of fulfillment that had been missing for so long. One day, while I was at work, I received a call that would bring closure and a new beginning. It was from my father-in-law. "Mary, I wanted you to hear it from me first," he said, his voice tinged with both sadness and resolve. "Tom and I had a long talk. He's stepping down from the company. He's going to take some time to sort himself out." I paused, absorbing the news. "I hope he finds what he's looking for," I replied, genuinely wishing him well. "And Mary," my father-in-law continued, "I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you did for our family. You're always welcome here." "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot to me," I said, a warm feeling spreading through me. In that moment, I realized that while some relationships had ended, others had transformed and strengthened. My bond with my father-in-law had grown into a deep, respectful friendship, one that I cherished. As time passed, I started to venture out into the world of dating again. It was daunting at first, but I soon found joy in meeting new people and experiencing new connections. Each date, each conversation, was a step towards healing and rediscovering the parts of myself that I had lost in my marriage. One evening, I found myself at the same Japanese pub where I had met Tom. Sitting at the bar, I reflected on the journey that had brought me full circle. "Back to where it all began?" a friendly voice asked. I turned to see the pub master, a knowing smile on his face. "In a way," I replied, returning the smile, "but also the start of something new." As I sipped my drink, I thought about the winding path my life had taken. The challenges, the hardships, and the triumphs had all led me to this moment. I had emerged stronger, more self-aware, and more resilient. That night, as I walked home under the starlit sky, I felt a sense of peace. The future was unwritten, a canvas waiting for my brush. The lessons of the past were etched in my heart, guiding me as I stepped into a new dawn. My story was one of transformation and growth, a testament to the strength that lies within us all. It was a reminder that even in our darkest hours, there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. As I opened the door to my apartment, I smiled to myself. This was just the beginning, a new chapter in the book of my life, and I was ready to write it with courage, hope, and an open heart. The journey ahead was mine to take, and I stepped forward with anticipation, ready to embrace whatever adventures lay ahead.